Great. Reverend Johnson, appreciate you having this conversation today on your reflections on the pro-democracy community and next steps. Would love if you could just start by talking a little bit about your work. What are you leading? Would love to hear about some of the good work you're doing in Ohio and how you think it relates to the pro-democracy movement.
Well, thank you for the invite. Uh, I'm a jack of all trades, master of none. I don't know if I'm leading much of anything as much as I am trying to lean in and learn from more things than not nowadays. In times past, I've offered a level of consultancy and kind of worked around what design and kind of collaboration could be and should be related to the deliberative engagement or deliberative action and dialogue, particularly around communities that have historically not been fully engaged in mainstream activities and movements like the one that is abounds right now. I've worked specifically with a number of nonprofits that have had a focus with this, particularly Bridge Alliance over the last many years, doing program and that bad acronym, diversity, equity, and inclusion work. And then before that, and along the continuum of that, at a grassroots level, at a regional level. I've been part of some significant kinds of movements and activities, and now work with a couple of unique kinds of initiatives that are looking to kind of fan out and further the work in some non-traditional methodology and ways, whether that is a police department that is trying to pull together what is a responsive kind of both pedagogy and division that looks at securing, encouraging First Amendment activity and expression here in Columbus, and probably a couple other things that I probably shouldn't keep listing, but I've been
No, I
fortunate
appreciate it.
kind of to kind of hang out in some spaces, and chiefly, I think my uniqueness is not only in terms of my own experience personally, but I have a very strong social theological orientation. And so communities of faith, communities of action, communities of consciousness, and their integration into the larger work has probably been what has been most ex provided the greatest gravitas for my presence in the field.
That's great. I have a bunch of follow-up questions, but would love, going off what you just talked about, would love to hear a little bit about, why do you care about this work? Why personally have you gotten involved in all of this?
On a personal level, my introduction probably came on the heels of my work and time spent in Ferguson, Missouri, around the death of Michael Brown Jr. and the subsequent kind of social and political revival of that community and of many communities that since. I was interested once I was kind of invited into some conversations and circles. I was intrigued because it's not necessarily the language, it was not necessarily the orientation that not only I was familiar with, but I was sitting here listening to individuals talk about something, and I'm saying, you know what, this ain't new. What y'all talk about doing is that's what we've been doing. That's what we have to do. We don't get the luxury to do this in a format of kind uh, of volunteer or kind of laissez-faire approach. This is what people do to
Life.
survive. Like,
Yeah.
and because of the situation, I'd always thought you had to talk to those who you were not always in common thought, in commonality with, because that's the only way compromise and opportunity or change would happen. And so I got intrigued because I was just basically saying, one, where are all the Black people in
Hmm.
these meetings or people of color? Two,
Hmm.
why are y'all talking like y'all doing something great? or newfangled. And of course, because we had science, the psychology and the neurological dimensions that were suggesting that, what makes things challenging like dialogue or interaction with people comes out of these deep-seated kinds of phobias or misunderstandings that are both, anatomical and biological and physiological and all kind of just crazy stuff. And I'm just sitting here like, really, it can't be that deep, right? And y'all get money for
Mhm.
this.
How much of this, it seems like if we're using the nomenclature like pro-democracy movement, which you can push back on too, because I'm not even sure if that's the right one, that some of this has to do with you have national groups that are speaking a certain way about doing certain things and potentially not as in community or working with folks on the ground that are actually doing the
Yeah.
work. Is that I'd love for you to reflect on that. Is that partially what you're trying to what you're articulating?
Yeah, that was part of it. I mean, obviously there was across the various iterations and the field has taken on a number of names, from bridging to now pro-democracy, which is
Yeah.
kind of challenging for some with still in the circle because, now it's gotten so partisan. I mean, the work, the work in its at least in my understanding and my participation in some of this earliest years was about the recognition or acknowledgement that I may have a particular flag in the ground, and yet there's still a hill for us all to storm to, a higher call, a higher ground, a higher responsibility. And what's the effort and the energy in that which can bring us together so we reach that higher ground? Now, our democratic republic and the ideals and its precepts and its underpinnings were some of that, as well as for others who are more expanded, the universality of us as, not only citizens in nation but of people. Those kind of things brought us together, and so whatever was dividing or chasm, the idea of bridging was not only a great metaphor but a name for it. But over time, what we have now in terms of the partisan divide, and even discord around language. I mean, everything in the field is convoluted. The language is convoluted principally because everybody is either sensitive or offended by whatever the language choice is of the other. I recently told a group, the last group that I was sitting in of fellow thinkers and longtime practitioners with this, that as they feared the end or the challenge, particularly as each administration over the last two cycles has evolved, or three cycles, um, it has become much more partisan, and chiefly this work has become a cottage industry.
Hmm.
And so there are people doing this work at every level who know nothing about it at its highest levels and concern nothing about it. And yet there are people who are doing significant work under unique banner and description that gets no resource because it has not that same capital or equity or asset or market kind of share to leverage what is necessary to really grow it. In other words, they can't compete for the same dollars. And it's like anything that has happened over time in the nonprofit or third sector. It gets
Hmm.
it gets more times than not fragmented and competitive than cohesive and cohesive and cooperative.
I haven't that boutique constituency term is powerful and appreciate the thinking too of the fragmentation that happens with competition to some extent, which happens across cycles. Um,
Mhm.
so I mean, you're talking about things becoming more partisan. I'm curious, like, what do you do about that? And if you could talk a little bit about, what you're actually doing on the ground, how are you able to manage against society becoming more partisan with the fact that you're trying to do work with people of all different ideological persuasions?
Yeah. Personally, I have tried to measure it. I don't think you ever master it or avoid it. I mean, we are who we are, and this the game. We all choose sides. Some of us choose wrongly, like I did last night. But
Sorry about that.
no, it's okay. It's okay. I got to represent where I'm from, and
You're from KC?
Yeah, I'm from Kansas City, Missouri.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so, you ride with it, but you also
Yeah.
you got to tip your hat and say, hey, when you get your butt kicked, get your butt kicked.
Yeah. Yeah.
But the way that I've tried to measure it has been, uh, you know, I learned something when I was in public life. I was fortunate enough to be a gubernatorial staffer, to work for a mayor who was still a sitting congressman, to dabble in some things like that. And I remember being told uh, the expression "no permanent friends, permanent interests." Okay, and so when we are centric in around what is mission one, or what is for me the collective good, what is the equitable reality or opportunity that is inalienable in terms of our own kind of larger societal and democratic value system, or what is also in my own faith tradition, what is right and righteous and expected of us and to us, one to another, and in the universe. Then you can work to have dialogue, conversation, or even take action together that again has us charging to a higher ground, even though we may be coming from different, and not to be too militaristic, coming from different directions, coming from different groups, carrying, whatever is the uniqueness of who we are, and our banner, to the same end. And so dialogue or opportunities to engage people in discussing, not just for discussion's sake, but directed towards some greater sense of responsibility, or resource or opportunity, always, at least in most cases, is something that we don't have a problem with. So, basic idea is, after being all highbrow, you know, what do we to borrow from Biggie Smalls? Tell me what your interests are, who you be with.
Mhm.
What is it that you like? What's your name? And who is important and where is important to you? And I bet those same things might be important to me. And if we share that, or if we believe towards that, then we can engage and not have to have a conversation. Um, it doesn't suppress the micro or what we think is important, but there's so many macro things. I think Dr. King said it best. We major in minors. We major in
Mhm.
minors. So that has been a long-winded answer. That's kind of been my orientation and my approach, is to break things down.
It gets somewhere. So, I mean, appreciate the thinking on, I mean, how to bring how to potentially bring people together. You talked about how, I mean, you've both talked about the notion of, folks coming in with different language orientation, things becoming increasingly partisan, the fragmentation of organizations in the sector. I mean, what do you think the state is of the pro-democracy movement? And again, like, I know the terminology might not be perfect, and so you can insert language there, but what do you think the state of the field is right now?
Yeah, it's like any any boutique boutique industry. You know,
Mm-hmm.
about a couple years back, I I referenced in our internal conversation about when we were doing some analysis, similar assessment. I said the best analogy for where we're at right now is the dot-com boom and bust.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I bet if you draw a little curve around in the trajectory of how long that the initial kind of groundswell, upswell of imaginative, innovative, and just every good idea who was competitive and attractive to be infused capital and energy to, and how many of those actually who from that constellation and distillation still are in orbit.
Mm-hmm.
I bet you could do the same thing around whatever and whoever is this movement.
Mm-hmm.
All the things that got big money and big splash, they done crashed, or
Mm-hmm.
flickering. All the people who had small venture capitalists kinds of operations that were funding them and fueling them, even initiatives like, you know, I dare say Bridge Alliance and others, that were hoping that they could then be, attractive enough to make, collaborative and larger kinds of conglomeration of activity and network. There, those things haven't happened. And so the best you can hope for now is that now you got a bunch of people running around here creating apps and hoping that
Mm-hmm.
somebody picks them up. You got a bunch of Mavericks and all the latest innovative people who can't go to Hollywood who are trying to, pitch their best show so it gets streamed enough. And then, like I said, over the last 7 years, there's been a lot of folks who've been trying to figure out what's the backbone, what's the scalpel, what is this, what's the anatomy of this work, what is going to stand it up, what's the skeletal system that will then put all the other aesthetic and muscular things to bear. And they haven't figured out how to do it because everybody comes and says, if I want to build a new database and network, I need trillions of dollars, billions of dollars, millions of dollars to do it, to get all the information and whatever. Or I don't have the bandwidth or the power. And so I know this is probably over exaggeration in terms of a reflection, but um, that's it's never been organized to be organized. And now you have a professional class of worker um, in this field. Um, these ain't the tree huggers no more. I mean, these aren't the people who just showed up at Capitol rallies, or who went to their neighborhood city council, and these aren't the stay home parents that just in between making lunch and nap time were sitting up blogging. Okay, there ain't too many executives in this field who ain't making seven figures. They're making six figures. So you
Mm-hmm.
have, but they got four people or it's three people. And so you got a organization with a $500,000, $1 million budget with three people, and it's heavy at the top and nobody at the bottom. And we all are doing this work that is fueled and focused on our survival, not on the strengthening and of the forwarding of a real agenda. Okay. So I'm pro democracy, but I'm for it for the veterans.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I'm pro democracy, but I'm for my particular referendum and reformation or reformation of whatever I don't like about the system.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Ain't nobody trying to be Montgomery Wards and J.C. Penney's no more.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody wants to be a couture shop. Everybody wants to be Versace and Louis Vuitton. It's not going to work that way. Somebody got to be Old Navy. So,
Mm-hmm.
or somebody's got to decide we're going to be Walmart and we're going to house this and let everybody bring, or Target and bring all the stuff in here. But you can't do and in both.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So about how organizations can survive on their own and focusing on the solution, but not necessarily the problem.
Yeah. And the problems evolve. Like,
Mm-hmm.
um, and this is not unusual. I won't call out names, but we see this in other areas uh, of social change, and third sector work. I mean, um, in my own experiences and traditions, there's three or four major organizations that have a foothold on youth and educational development.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I call them, there's the top tier, or, groups like that. I mean, and they learn to coexist. The Boys and Girls Clubs, the Boy Scouts and the Girl Scouts, the YMCA, the YWCA.
Mm-hmm.
They've learned to cohabitate. We have the same thing in civil rights and social engagement. You've got the Urban League, you've got the NAACP, you've got, uh, um, you know, different advocacy groups. We see it in law. So the difference is uh, what has happened, and you have it a little bit. I mean, there's those that have who are at certain levels and have certain peers operate, coexist, and interact with that level of peer. But the greatest amount of impactful, in my bias, impactful work and sustainable or endearing work is always going to happen where people have a mentality that I borrow not only for activism but in ministry. Money never dictates whether or not we do ministry. It only speaks to or has influence over the magnitude, the dimensions, the aesthetic, and even some of the scale of how we may do ministry. But the option
Hmm.
ministry, or the option to make sure that people have equitable and right and righteous opportunity or responsibility or resource given to them, does not require whether or not there's a movement at the highest level, because people are going to do that every day in any way. Especially people who
Hmm.
are marginalized and displaced or disenfranchised. They've not been waiting on the good folks of the pro-democracy movement to figure out. And matter of fact, now more than ever, to say about pro-democracy or anything about dialogue. Some may even argue at the levels that I now continue to engage with, we have worsened the situation.